Elizabeth, and my overarching theme is familial relationships. So I have three different sub-themes, and the first sub-theme is the nature of these relationships. The second sub-theme is the consequence of the lack or excess of love, and the third would be the reality and how dynamic these relationships actually are. So my first artwork would be this artwork, which is a tiger mom, and it was used to represent my mother's protective love over me. And many of the works in the first sub-theme was based on personal experiences. And if we move to the second artwork, this is an artwork based on the relationship that me and my sister had, and it's meant to symbolize the companionship between siblings. And if we move on to the third artwork, which is on this table has two different artworks. One are the bowls, which are used to represent the sacrificial nature of my father's love. And this was drawn from the idea of many parents sacrificing their own food for other loved ones. And also on this table, we have the first work in the second sub-theme, which are the bows. The bows are used to communicate China's Little Emperor syndrome, where the grandparents usually allow their grandchildren to become very chubby and small because of the excess love that they provide them. And this is part of the second sub-theme, which is the excessiveness of love. And this sub-theme also draws on many social issues. The next work would be this short film, which looks at the social issues of hoarding. And we can see that as time progresses and the grandmother loses touch with her family members, we can see the gradual worsening of her condition. Moving on to the third sub-theme, we have these three works, which focuses on the reality and how dynamic these relationships are. This artwork focuses on the miscommunication between family members, and usually when messages are miscommunicated or misinterpreted, it results in building tension between different family members. Moving on, we have this artwork, which explores how different family members might want to have control, usually out of protection or out of love for the family member, but often it results in the receiver feeling very trapped. Moving on to the last work, this is was on the excessiveness of love as well, and how its overwhelmingness can result in the receiver feeling very crushed due to the heavy weight of it.
Hi, my name is Sadisha, and today I'll be bringing you through my works. So my overarching theme is about social and personal tensions and anxieties underlying. So I've used a mix of painting and textural materials like textile, wire, and I use these materials to juxtapose the tension between the more traditional forms of art and a more explorative form of art. So moving to my first piece, this piece is an introductory piece that sets the tone for the rest of my works. So it's supposed to present the aggressive need and the constant need to fidget and pick on skin. So I was inspired by long exposure photography, and I used the thread to present multiple frames of to show the finger movement. Moving on to my second studio, this piece of work is supposed to be more personal, and it presents my personal tensions and anxieties that surround around the need to have control over my life and the need to always present a calm front despite having these tensions in life. Moving on to my next piece of work. In this work I've combined painting with more textural elements. So this piece of work is supposed to present the fear of losing home and a familiar and familial space to me. So I present different scenes of my home space and space that is familiar to me, and present the fear of losing that space. Moving on to my fourth studio, I move on to more social tensions in this work, and I focus on presenting the tensions and anxieties that arise due to the scrutiny upon our bodies and the scrutiny upon our appearances. So the reason why these figures are facing away from the audience is supposed to be due to, they're supposed to show a form of rejection of the omnipresent scrutiny upon their body and scrutiny upon appearances that causes a sense of discomfort of the mind that manifests itself into the body. My next piece of work is inspired by the form and figure of cocoons. So the cocoon, life cycle of the cocoon presents a form of visible transformation, but also internal transformation we go through as we slowly learn to accept our imperfections and come into terms with them, and also have the courage to shed these protective layers that we form. And the last piece is supposed to be a final juxtaposition of all the tension that is built up throughout my other pieces. So this piece is named Catharsis because it is an outpour of expression and emotion. So I was inspired by the form of natural fungi. I used the symbol of this growth as to represent human nature and how there's beauty within those imperfections. And so this outpour of growth is supposed to show an outpour, supposed to symbolize an outpour of expression and emotion as well, and finally coming to terms with our insecurities and imperfections and embracing them. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My body of work generally revolves around the theme of time and change, more specifically our relationship with time. So time is something that has been quantized by all of us. We understand it in hours, seconds, minutes, but in these works I try to explore different ways to perceive time through the visuals. So in my first work, I was inspired by how we interact with nature, in a sense that we've all grown from nature, but like when you look around in the city, you see grass peeking through pavements or trees breaking through walls. So I wanted to capture this relationship we have with nature, where we always try to fit it into what we want it to be, like through curated gardens and so on. So here you can see cracks in the figure which represents us as nature peeks through it. In my next piece, I explore time in a sense of my little brother, because I feel that his relationship with time is rather naive in a sense that he plays around and is unaware of the progression of time, and from his perspective he doesn't notice that time is passing, so he's playing very happily. In my next works, these two, I painted my grandparents because having explored how my little brother interprets time, I now look at their attitudes to time. So in this piece, my grandma, she stares at herself in a mirror, and the longer she stares, the older she seems. Like, as a viewer, I begin to notice all the wrinkles and sagging in her skin. And as she stares, the more negative her thoughts become, and you begin to see these flickers of negative thoughts getting darker and darker. This piece, on the other hand, is of my grandpa and I, and unlike Papa, my grandpa sits there. He's fading away because he's aging, but he's at peace and he's calm. So I wanted to capture this appreciation of time instead. And the difference between these two works is this one tries to pause time and capture us elongating it, whereas in this one, time is flowing and it doesn't wait for her to finish painting the face. In my next work, it's more self-reflective because I begin to think about how I've been observing their interpretations of time. But in this piece, I look at myself and I realize that I don't really know time either, and my perception that I have a lot of time being young may be a bit foolish. In my next work, my last piece, I zoom out from portraiture and I begin to look at the environment around me, just as I did in my first work. So in this piece, I decided to paint this building, Keong Site Road, because it's a landmark of Singapore to many of us. But I wanted to capture this idea of gentrification where with globalization and urbanization, we're all rushing to be the top and to get in first place. But in this piece, I want to appreciate our heritage, and thus I painted it very intricately to capture its beauty, which we ought to appreciate. So, yeah. Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Dwight, and today I will explain to you about my exhibition theme of Vietnamese identity. As a Vietnamese student studying in Singapore, I am far from my home country. Such distance has thus enabled me to reflect more critically upon the question, what is Vietnam? To which I attempt to find the answer through art making. The selection of my artworks exemplify my approach of unpacking the Vietnamese identity from various angles, spanning historical and socio-cultural events to private and public history. Thus, the viewers can reflect upon its complexity while discovering their relevance in discussing other cultures' issues as well, from colonialization to historical meta-narratives and minority rights. The two artworks, Hiding Thuy and A Mau 1960s, are the first artworks that are on the left panels. I selected them to jointly address the similar urge to hide personal identities due to social circumstances of myself and my great-grandma, while Hiding Thuy is a visual reflection of my attempts to blend into the new cultural environment. A Mau 1960s invites viewers to enter and look out at other works pertaining to social cultural events, like how my great-grandma might have done, having lived through several historical events. Studying abroad further enables me to critique Vietnam's historical relationships with French and Chinese occupations, hence the next three artworks, Fabriqué au Annam and Our Lady of La Vang, arranged in the central panels. The two artworks are positioned near to each other, as both critique the French colonization. Nevertheless, while I condemn the colonizers' ignorance of local culture in the former, I call for sympathy towards the persecuted Catholics in the latter. Hung in front of Our Lady of La Vang is Phay Lien, with the former being made from the latter's scrap, hinting at a culture's identity as both an assailant and a victim. Subsequently, I deconstruct more controversial aspects of contemporary Vietnam in the last three artworks arranged on the right. In Trung Trung and the Model Dissidents, the appropriation of minorities' cultures and the censorship of controversially patriotic artistic creations are put into questions respectively. The explicit presence of the Model Dissidents scraps prompts viewers to also look at my other paper cuts and reflect upon the idea of intentionally removing narratives. Ultimately, the audience is directed to fragments. My suggestion on understanding the Vietnamese identity, which is embracing its contradictions and multitudes, and searching through official and unofficial sources for a multifaceted truth. Combined with fragments overt references to various social cultural events, this work serves as a summary for my exhibition's preoccupations.
Yes. So that is my exhibition.
Hello, my name is Sherman, and this is my exhibition space. So, when exploring my works and my art pieces, I gravitated around the theme of duality. So, exploring the ideas of opposites and things that interact with each other while being contrasting. Starting with Studio 1. And so, in this studio, it is a lino cut work that I lino cutted different prints on different materials. You can see it's on packaging and on the clip itself. So the main idea that arises from this is the idea of appropriation and propaganda. So how we're able to view propaganda as fake and as something that is masqueraded as real. When we look at it from our outer lens, we can see that clearly. But we ourselves don't realize that advertisements and things that take up a lot of our attention actually is a sense of propaganda. So I wanted to merge advertisement, consumerism, materialism, and propaganda. So exploring further on that idea, I wanted a work that could be viewed in different angles and different directions. For example, in this studio, in Marlborough, we see the baby that is directly in front of the skull. However, if you start to take different directions and different angles of it, you see that the thing that it conceals, the skull, representing the sense of self-destructive nature in a lot of the vices that we use. So this is about how we must shift our perspective in order to see the different truths and the different perspectives. Going on to the middle of my exhibition space, this was a more introspective work and a transition from societal criticism to more personal criticism. Going on in my exploration and interactions with my grandfather, the idea of the young and old and the search for masculinity became a very big theme in my works. And so this is the idea of two worlds and two generations clashing, but in a way that is harmonizing with each other and creates a sense of unity. Now on to my next studio, next cafe, which is my magnum opus. This piece is a very introspective piece where I'm focusing more on self-criticism instead of looking outwards to criticize. Looking at my addiction to caffeine as a student, where I feel we as a society in Singapore, it's easy to criticize Western countries for their drug use and their use of vices because it's very easily accessible to them. But things that are accessible to us also become a vice. Thus, in my final studio, The Mask, really looking at my identity and as an artist and my past identity as a very studious student and someone that was very scholarly, someone that would easily get A's for their exams, especially since in primary school, where I was never seen as a child that was in risk of academic success. You can put on a mask and you can put on a veil and a facade. However, when you try to take it off and you realize that it's too late, it starts to hurt and it starts to injure you. And it's about how we use our identity in order to hide our true identity. It instead causes suffering in our desire to satisfy others. Yeah, and that is my exhibition space.
Hello everyone. So today I will be sharing about my work, of which the theme is placement and embodiment. So this work was inspired by my experience during COVID-19, where there was a lot of quarantines and lockdowns. So this caused me to escape into my own head more than usual, into imagined spaces, and this is what I seek to recreate in my work. I seek to create like otherworldly and metaphorical spaces within my work. My theme has a lot to do with spaces of home and spaces of belonging. And so in my first three works, which is Monotony, Paradigm and Enclosed, I explore placement with relation to my home during COVID-19. So Monotony is an interactive work where you can spin each of the pieces and view the photographs which have been taken using long exposure and double exposure photography. These show spaces within my home and it captures the mental state in which I was in during COVID-19. This paradigm shows my reinterpretation of the space within my house into an unfamiliar space. So at first it seems quite eerie and unfamiliar, but after you get to visit each scene, you slowly get to become more accustomed to the idea that actually the furniture is being placed on the ceiling. And so I wanted to capture this feeling, this balance between unfamiliarity and unfamiliarity. This work is a 3D work where you're supposed to peer into the openings and view the space within. I tried to capture the juxtaposition between the playful facade and the rather isolated and cold interior. And this was to mimic my experience during COVID-19 when I would peer outside the windows and see the playful facades, but know that within people were feeling lonely. This work is quite personal, even more so than the others, as it explores my memories of my grandfather who passed away when I was around 6. And so it is an exploration of memory and of how memories are easily altered by anecdotes and photographs and like future recollections of the person. I decided to move to a more local and global context And so I started with Dislocation, which explores the disorientating experience of the elderly who lived in Dakota Crescent for decades. So I wanted to kind of embody their mental state during this time as they moved to a new place, away from their old one where they had made countless memories. And so this was a really hard experience. And this is my final work, Seeking Home, which explores the mental states of the refugees, the Syrian refugees who fled from Syria during the refugee crisis. The pigeons symbolize the Syrians, as Syria is well known for their pigeon breeders, and the pigeons are always trained to return home, and I felt that this symbolized the Syrians quite well. So, thank you.
My name is Rachel, and I take HL Visual Arts. In my art making, I work mainly with clay and soft pastels. My artworks are all based on the theme of play, where I explore how play continues to exist beyond childhood. Inspired by the phenomenon of play as a multifaceted concept, my exhibition investigates how playfulness may visualize itself in different spaces, be it the physical, the intangible, or the unknown. Each of these works were inspired by the growing absence of play in my life, and I extend or distort different elements of play to comment on topics that are very close to heart. The arrangement of the exhibition space follows an expanding study of play, where my subject matter evolves from local to universal symbols. One of my earliest works employed caricature to portray the incongruity of adults interacting with local playgrounds. I hoped that their direct gazes would prompt viewers to question the presence of play in their own lives by asking themselves, do they still belong in a playground, or have they forgotten how to play as well? In another work of mine, I put my own personal twist on the popular Western story of Alice in Wonderland. In creating my own original characters and presenting each scene as a cyclical narrative, I wanted to portray a continuous search for self-identity. As you can see here, I incorporate aspects of my own identity, such as my Chinese heritage, my national identity, and my physical appearance. These works are just some examples of the ways I interpret play in my exhibition. As a whole, my works offer numerous interpretations of the act of playing, seeking to illustrate the forms and functions of play that are rarely acknowledged. Thank you.